So the work that I do in and around the River Falls region is in collaboration with the Western Wisconsin Conservation Council, which is a farmer-led watershed council formed in 2018. So I always have to acknowledge them and for their gracious support of me being in their fields and coming into their homes and testing their wells. So, all right. So I have a lot of different studies sort of percolating, I guess. Maybe that's the way to frame this talk. I don't have something so nice and condensed as Ina did. But I'm running a few different studies at River Falls concerning nitrate in our region. And nitrate is a contaminant of concern. It's a very common contaminant that's coming from a variety of sources, but given agriculture's very large footprint in the landscape, agriculture is often a very large source of nitrate to surface and groundwaters. Nitrate also runs with water. It's very soluble in water, so if it's out in the landscape, it is likely to move with water if water is moving. So nitrate levels are increasing in groundwater across many agricultural regions, including western Wisconsin. And again, we are collaborating with the Western Wisconsin Conservation Council, that farmer-led watershed council established in 2018. They have about 50 to 60 members on average with some hangers-on here and there, so they're a pretty vibrant group in the region. We have growing baseline research programs that are investigating groundwater contaminants across the region. So I facilitate a well monitoring project and network in the region, primarily focused on nitrate, as well as some lysimeter nests for soil water nitrate. And I also have sort of a ripple from DIH is a DATCAP-funded project through their nitrogen optimization pilot project program, looking at nitrogen fertilizer and corn yield, and then looking at nitrate and soil water in that project. So just to give you a sense of where we are, the blue star is here. The yellow star is the Twin Cities region. River Falls is right on the border of Wisconsin and Minnesota. So we're working sort of in that red box area. And just to sort of blow that up, the Western Wisconsin Conservation Council has membership across southern Polk County, all of St. Croix County, and sort of northern Pierce County in western Wisconsin. The testing program that we developed for the Western Wisconsin Conservation Council started in 2018, so right at the founding of the group. That was their big question. So if you know anything about farmer-led watershed councils, they are a peer-led group, peer-led groups, and they sort of come up with the issues themselves that are most important to them, and then they seek outside help from third parties. And they approached me through a predecessor of mine at UW River Falls, and asked if I'd be willing to help them develop a well testing program for nitrate. So in that program, when we start testing a well, when a new member comes into WWCC, we will test their well 4 times in that first year, right? So we get 4 samples in before we start to decide, is this a well we need to keep monitoring, or is it something that we can dial back? So some of our wells are very stable in their nitrate concentrations. They are always going to be 2 parts per million, and because that's just what they are. And so for those wells, we don't really feel the need to track that behavior, those trends very carefully. We go back to them annually. Some of our wells are up and down. Some of them are incredibly high, and so for those wells, we tend to go back more frequently. So we might go 3 or 4 times every year just to keep track of those trends. We also monitor things like pH, temperature, specific conductivity, phosphate, and chloride in those samples. But nitrate, again, is our focus. One important aspect of our monitoring program is that we need to keep the data anonymous. So when I make public presentations, I don't identify whose well has that really high number, because in this group, there's a hesitancy to share that information. These are not folks that are participating in your county well testing programs because they don't want their numbers associated with problems from their operations. And so they're unlikely to participate in programs where the data are shared with maybe regulators, right? So that was sort of part of the agreement when we started working together, was that we share well data with the well owners, but any data that is presented publicly needs to be sort of aggregated and anonymous. And so therefore we get very good participation in our well testing network. So each year, we've sort of, those first few years, we sort of grew our numbers pretty substantially. We're at about 100. That seems to be where we've leveled off. We're testing about 100 wells each year. We surpassed 1,000 samples in 2023, so it's been a pretty big effort. We're entering our 8th year. We have a whole crew of undergraduates who are just about ready to go out and start the well testing for the season. Looking at average nitrate concentrations in our wells with some, variability around those averages. So this is, again, sort of presenting that anonymous data, right? I just have these average nitrate concentrations in all of my wells from the lowest average to the highest average. And a few things that jump out, and just to put the health standard in there, so the health standard for nitrate in drinking water is 10 parts per million, and that's to be protective of the most vulnerable in our populations, infants, especially those that are formula fed because their entire diet may be liquid, and so they could be taking in very large amounts of nitrate for their body size. So that 10 part per million is protective of them especially, although we do know that nitrate can have other effects at lower concentrations over long periods of time. So about 40% of our wells have an average nitrate concentration above the health standard in our data set. And sort of the higher average concentrations are also associated with sort of more variability. So these are those wells that are sort of going up and down over even the course of, from 1 month to the next month in a summer season. So about 40% are above that health standard, and that's a real concern for the rural communities that we're working in. Okay, so just to put it in context, and this isn't unique to this particular set of well owners, right? This is sort of pretty common across western Wisconsin. So here you can see Polk County to the north, St. Croix in the middle, and then Pierce County to the south. And this is showing data from the UW-Stevens Point Wisconsin Well Quality Viewer. So they have a great resource where you can see all sorts of groundwater contaminants in your region. And we sort of have some hot spots of elevated nitrate concentrations in wells across our region. But they're pretty similar results to what we're seeing. In some cases, within townships, 29% of wells tested in the other well testing programs are showing concentrations above that health standard. Some areas, there aren't any wells that are testing above that health standard. So we see a lot of sort of expected relationships, things that maybe aren't much of a surprise. So average nitrate concentrations in our wells seem to be directly proportional, loosely to specific conductivity. So if there's more nitrate in your well, you're also likely to have more other dissolved solids. But this is sort of, for all average, right, data. But when we start to divide that out, because we have multiple years of data and we know that those years have different weather conditions, we start to see some differences in those trends, right, and in those relationships. So 2019 was sort of one of our wettest years. I think it was the wettest year on record in western Wisconsin. So that relationship there is in the orange on both of these figures. And then 2021, 22 were both very dry years. So we've had sort of a droughty last 3-ish years. Last year was a little bit different because we had a very wet spring, and then somebody turned off the spigot. So we had a really dry late summer into fall. But those relationships there on the left-hand side, again, those are May nitrate concentrations and specific conductivity in limestone wells that I know of. I don't have data for all of my wells in terms of what aquifer they're drawing from, because we just couldn't find the well logs. So these are known wells. Let's see. So on the left-hand side, those are for the full data set. Those are all the wells. We go in early summer or late spring. We go out and we test all of the wells in the data set. And then the August wells are on the right-hand side. And those are those wells that are super variable. So they're the ones we're going to more frequently. And they have very different relationships. Some of our wells are very stable, like I said. Some are highly variable. So on the left, you've got this deep well in a limestone aquifer, and it's just always like 2 or 1 or 0.5. We have some wells like that. Other wells, this one on the left-hand side, that's about a 50-foot well that's also in limestone, we think, maybe. But it's just sort of all over the place. So we track that one closely. Looking at precipitation trends in the region, like I said, that 2019 season was incredibly wet. So it was our wettest year on record. And then that has been followed up by some very dry years more recently. I'm going to flip this figure right now. So that's the data flipped, and then and then wait for it. Okay, now you can see the flipped data. So the lines are the flipped precipitation data. So when they dip down, that means we had more precipitation. And this is, again, comparing them to showing average nitrate concentrations in limestone and sandstone wells across the region during our sampling periods, and sort of aligned with those precipitation levels. And haven't yet had a chance to really tease out the data very much, but we did see some really high nitrate concentrations in our wells, the sampling periods after that incredibly wet year. So, is there some connection here? And we're hoping that by building this data set over the long term, we can start to tease out more of this sort of climate data. Oh boy. Okay, I also have some lysimeter studies that are ongoing, and this is looking at soil water nitrate. In 4 different fields across the region, I have lysimeter nests where I have sort of a shallow 2-foot lysimeter. I have a deeper lysimeter, however far I could get it in, up to 8 feet. And then I also have a wick lysimeter. So suction lysimeters, you apply a vacuum and they can pull water off the soil matrix. Wick lysimeters are just taking whatever is percolating down through the soil profile. It was really great because the first 3 years of this project were all drought, so it was it's a really good time to start a soil water project. Just some pictures showing the installation of these instruments, and then how, like when you're working in a working field, sometimes your lysimeters get manure slurry in them, so that's really fun too. A few of the trends that we maybe are seeing. So these are 2 sites with some pretty conductive strata in the soil profile, so we don't see terribly high nitrate concentrations in the soil water, but we do get a lot of water moving through these sites. So you can see like the orange dots on there are the wick lysimeters, so you're seeing a lot of water move through that soil profile pretty freely. The other colored dots are the suction lysimeters, so that's sort of what's just sitting there. Our shoulder seasons, I would point out, tend to be times of really high water movement. So if we're talking leaching, it's going to be during those spring and fall seasons in our fields. These are a couple sites that do not have those conductive strata in them, and so we don't have a lot of wick lysimeter data, and sometimes we don't have a lot of suction lysimeter data either. But again, we see, I think the data for these are a little bit more variable, and I think what it's pointing to is that it really depends on the field, which is, what the farmers will tell you. Like, it depends on the field, what's going on. Lastly, I would just mention this is sort of that ripple project where we have lysimeter nests in an experimental treatment looking at nitrogen fertilizer and corn yield, but we threw in some lysimeters just for fun. So we have a shallow and a deep suction lysimeters in these fields. And the data, these are some initial data from that project. So this is the first few samples we collected from those in the end of 2013. We sort of saw those nitrate concentrations in the soil water declining in that fall season in our shallow lysimeters. We saw some increases in the deep ones that sort of line up with the declines we saw in the shallow. So maybe that nitrate moving downward. And then looking at by treatment, so we have these increasing levels of nitrate that we're adding to the fields. Our highest treatment was just screaming high. So some intriguing data. I'm not making conclusions from this at this point. So I would say my conclusions are pretty broad at this point, and I'm still mostly focused on ongoing questions like which wells are most susceptible to groundwater contamination, and how do those land use changes really translate into meaningful change in groundwater contamination. So with that, I'll stop, because I was supposed to a minute ago.